We want to transition to a segment now called How to Avoid Losing Money in Real Estate. And really what Chris and I were bantering back and forth, I think last week we said, oh, well, how to avoid losing money really just means like, hey, let's just tell everyone how many times we screwed up. So that way you can get lessons on how we screwed up. And so it's not just the associates that get that benefit, because we'll lose the money and then now you get the benefit from the lesson.
That literally was the game plan Monday.
And we think it's always really important for us to have these types of segments because we are nowhere near perfect. We make a ton of mistakes, and we have throughout many years. But after we make those mistakes, those things change. If you've ever looked at our first QLS home study course, those 10 modules and a very terrible camera, the transition from that to these are all the mistakes we made during that time frame and then documented them, implemented them, so that way everyone could learn from them. So we wanted to walk through just some nuggets of information for the next like 45 minutes. We'll probably take some Q&A and we'll keep it pretty low key on this, so that way everyone can pull out as many nuggets as possible.
Yeah, so we can float mics. I think as we go, instead of them writing questions, we'll pause, let you guys breathe a little bit and ask questions, because I seriously think each one of these, or some of these, could be like a half a day seminar. It could be, and it comes out elsewhere, but we'll start.
Yeah.
You can tell we have zero agenda other than just telling you all the dirty laundry. So you want to, Zach, you got a list going that's a little longer than mine. You want to kick us off?
Been writing them down for the past 8 years. Well, let's bring it all the way back to the beginning. So I told you guys before, and maybe many of you know, many of you don't. So the first deal that I did took me 6 months. The first deal I ended up doing was a subject to deal. I shouldn't say just me, it was the team, but it was the first deal that I brought to the team in the field, brought it from scratch to the transaction being completed. Now this deal happened to be, it's in a place called Jefferson, Massachusetts, if anyone's familiar with it, but so that house is also in Holden as well. It's like two different townships, I guess the best way to put it.
I still don't get it. That's why we...
So the property's listed in both. In one of them, it's listed as being de-leaded or certified of not having lead in the property. This is like an 1800s house. As you've been in New England, there's many of them. And then the other one, it was so one that said no knowledge, and then the other one we couldn't find any information on. So we end up now buying this property, subject to closing on it. The seller is going through divorce. He's got no money in the deal. Teacher. So we go and close on it. We place a tenant buyer in the house. The tenant buyer, there's probably 30 lessons in this one deal. So the tenant buyer, not the best tenant buyer. If Kayla's around here, she could probably attest to that. Not the best tenant buyer. So then she caused the ruckus and said, hey, my kids are eating lead paint. And
5 kids.
5 kids.
All
There's lead
under the
paint.
age.
So she was doing self-tests on it. We then discover that the property needs to be de-leaded. We hire somebody, and they say, yeah, it's going to cost you $30,000 to de-lead this house. $30,000. So you can imagine, son-in-law trying to enter in the family business, brings the first deal, $30,000. They're like, are we sure we want this guy in our family?
Okay, Zach,
not making very good decisions already.
As you said, this deal we could dissect in an entire associate development day. There's that many cool lessons in it, so it's nothing.
So here's
we all
the
did it.
lesson.
It wasn't just him. It was all of us.
So here's the lesson I wanted you to glean from it, though. Do your due diligence when it comes to the properties, because if we did further due diligence, we would have discovered that it was listed in 2 different counties, and we would have realized that there was known lead in the property. And we didn't need to get a lead certificate. At least we would have known the $30,000 was part of the deal.
2 comments. 3 comments. One is due diligence-wise. Whenever we mess up, agreements or processes or checklists change, you will notice in all our agreements after that happened that there's a clause in there about lead, mold, and asbestos responsibility being on the seller. Doesn't matter if it's sub to or not. So it would have been a lawsuit and some other mess, but at least it would have mitigated our losses, perhaps, maybe. Secondly, earlier someone asked about, and I responded about Fund and Grow, remember?
Yep.
Okay. You guys might remember, Nick and Zach, we had just set up Fund and Grow. So yes, we say it's no money down, but on occasion, you'll either find a good deal or have a problem where you'll need it. We used our brand new lines with Fund and Grow to do that deal, and we waited till another payday 1 or 3 to come down the pike, and we paid it off. We used it as a business line, and it was specifically Fund and Grow, and that was in 2015. And so here we are 7 years later. I'm giving you the same advice. Set your company up with Fund and Grow. This is the second lesson. The third lesson was the buyer. Nick, you have a mic? Okay, in a second. Nick, there's no way, in my opinion, and you might have some thoughts on this, Nick, that we would accept that buyer today. So one of my things on here, I bulleted, but a lot of them are in this house, and that is accepting the wrong buyers with either too little down, which might have been the case, yeah, you might remember, Nick, and or other smell tests. Comments, Nick? Her name was April, but that wasn't her real name.
There were a lot of red flags with her that I tried to explain away, or I tried to be like, oh no, this is fine, this is gonna work for you. And I tried to make it work for her, but I think it's important to say that most buyers our program is not a fit for, and we're not supposed to change our program for the buyers. The buyers are either a fit for our program or they're not. And the ones that are a very good fit. It ends up being a very symbiotic relationship.
Do you remember why she wasn't? I honestly don't. I just remember she was a nightmare. Little money down. I remember that specifically. We would take buyers back then with less money down to do a deal.
Less than 3%. Yeah, it was less than 3%.
Now it's unheard of.
Yeah. If you take less than 3%, you're asking for a problem.
You will have a headache.
That's a writer downer. I don't see anybody writing that down.
Good answer.
Oh, okay.
So
write it down again.
Anything else, just for high points, Nick? Because again, these could be seminars. Anything else on the buyer side? Because that's a big issue. And then due diligence on the house. Those are the two major issues.
I think it's not being patient when accepting a buyer.
Yeah.
Because you see a $5,000 or a $10,000 check that can happen Friday or next Friday.
That's it.
As opposed to just waiting a little bit, waiting another 30 to 45 days, and there's a strong likelihood that you're going to have a buyer with 15 to 20,000 down, as opposed to 5 or 10,000 now. Well, just wait a little bit, because there will always be a better buyer.
And
Always.
Nick has proven, I won't say proven us wrong, but always, if we're patient, just kind of goes to me and Zach.
I was literally just going to say, still to this day, do Chris and I hammer Nick and be like, Nick, what the heck? Like, and Nick's like, don't worry. The buyer's coming. The buyer's coming. And then it always happens. But we're still on him, so we still don't have any patience. So it does take time. Lots and lots of time.
Okay, but here's the good news. You guys all have that same smell test as an associate. Use Nick. Okay. I think we should pivot and ask Brian, with a lot less deals so far, is there something that comes to mind as we kick this off?
There's a lot. A recent conversation you and I had, and this is also the
We have them every day. So
we have them, yeah, we have like 15 a day, but this is the one where you saved me. You saved my ass.
In a car.
Yeah. So I had two seller situations where I thought it was a dead end. Complete dead end, like I was going to lose a bunch of money because I didn't know what to do. And I called Chris. I was prepared for it. It was actually our coaching call. So I prepared for my coaching call. It's a whole separate discussion. But these are the two things that I wanted to ask him, like, hey, I need help with this. And without going into super detail, he had the answers for both seller issues. I thought I was going to lose both houses that are existing.
What was at least one? Just like, what's the nugget for them?
Yeah, the one was I didn't do my due diligence on the forbearance. So I had accepted a lease purchase and was speaking to the bank at the beginning of the process that they would move the forbearance amount to the back of the loan, which is what they were doing. Well, they came back. I never got in writing. That's the lesson. Never got in writing. Chris told me to make sure you get it in writing. So I put the buyer in the house, and everything was, was kosher. We were good. And then the bank came back just recently and said, hey, this is due now because the seller left the house and isn't living there. The forbearance is due now. You got to pay it right now, about $22,000, or you can pay it over the next 4 months. And I'm like, hell, I got $22,000. I mean, I could get it, but I didn't want to have to go through that. So we had the conversation, and you basically had told me, like, hey, look, number one, get that in writing, but we can raise the money for the 22 and then take the house sub 2. We'll take the deed because it was a lease purchase 3 years, and the seller's going to get less equity.
So wait, hold on.
That's about,
There's a lot of cool things there.
for sure.
So the seller in a lease purchase was due some equity at the end of the term. So it's the first question I asked him. Are we naked or do we owe this guy money at the end of this deal? Okay, we do? Great. So now let's call... Huh?
Leverage.
Let's call said seller and say, hey, good news. Now he doesn't know all this bad news. Good news. You're owed this sometime in the future. What if perhaps we gave you this, less? Like maybe now. So we just picked up some profit there instead of a headache. That's one big thing.
Yeah, it's a $30,000 call right there.
Second big thing, there's a question in this pile, so I'll sprinkle this in. We'll do it later. He's going to move from a sandwich, which is self-employment income, I don't want to get too crazy here, to a sub 2 where he's going to own it, control it, depreciate it, and maybe own it for 30 years, maybe not, but guess what? It's his choice. This whole thing just got better, I think is what I said to you in the car. Got better, not worse.
Got better.
Always.
Right. And what I thought I was dead. Like, well, what am I going to do? They're going to foreclose on the seller.
I want to say this, Zach, to these guys, because we've had mentors tell us, our team, you guys tell people this stuff too much, you're going to scare them away from the industry because they want to give you all the fluff. We're not trying to scare you. We are trying to say this stuff will come up, and it's okay. We can help you pivot. That's why we share it.
Here's the lesson out of that whole thing. Anytime there's a pivot needed in a deal, it's always better. Nick, I'm sitting there staring at Nick, because he's the one that always then transitions the deal, because we're like, we're going to pivot now. Let's figure out now a transition. So anytime that happens, I'm going to have to say this. My guess is you're going to make up another, if you already say it's a $30,000 call, so throw another $30,000 in your back pocket. My guess is that's going to be another $80,000 to that back.
Because he owns it.
Because he owns it, and it would be smart now to hold on to it for the next at least 5 additional years. So these things happen, and it's better. Although it may not seem that at the time, they're always better. When a buyer leaves, a buyer defaults. Better, because you can create a better deal. Always happens. Or exit a deal early and get some profits ahead of your time.
I have 2 general ones I'm sure you guys have comments on. And I'll let you guys pick which one. One is I wrote, skipping any steps. And I know I said this in 19 or 18 here. And it was, when we talk about stacking like we did this morning, these steps, stacking, it's not a buffet where you get to choose if you want to have the same good results. It's not. It's, we say, hey, Rick, you probably need a VA now. And here's why, and here's the type of person you need. That's your next step. It's not a maybe. It's not, okay, I'll do that later. That's your next step, if you want the ultimate results. So I wrote skipping any steps, not a buffet. Do you guys have any comments? Maybe, maybe not.
Agree 100%. And for anyone that asks me, like, how did you do it, Brian? That's how I did it. I didn't skip anything. Skip nothing. I missed nothing. I just continued to do, like, okay, Chris, what do I do next? Or Zach, what do I do next? Like, the first thing I asked when I came in as an associate, I said, all right, Zach, what do I do? Print out the expired list and start calling. Guess what I did? I print out the expired list, started dialing, sent in my calls, and then, it just continued. Like, what do I even ask still now, like, hey, well, I'm thinking about doing this. What's the next move?
Yeah, I get a comment. So it just reminds me of, the first house that me and Kayla bought, and is Kayla around here? I wanted to make sure that.
You have not recognized
She
Kayla.
came here and then disappeared? She got my phone. Oh, perfect. I'm so glad that
Serious?
she came to help you, Steve.
She did? Where?
It was in my car.
All right, back to her.
All right. So me and Kayla go in, we're like 2 years into or maybe even less than 2 years into real estate. Self-employed, made the transition from bartender to real estate. Want to buy a house. We got Remy, my son. He's like maybe 1 year old at the time or less. Trying to get out of Newport now and move to Portsmouth. So we buy this house on a lease purchase, and we follow the steps. Now I'm saying this because in 2 years from now, from the beginning of that story, me and Kayla decided that we're not going to go buy this house anymore. We're actually going to exit. We're going to sell this house. Well, the seller didn't like that. Why? Because we bought it for like $525.
Zach, just so you know, they tied it up on a sandwich.
Yeah, sandwich lease purchase. And then we ended up putting it on the market for like $650. So he was pissed. He was like, no, we're renegotiating now because you're not buying the house. I said, no, we're not, because this is the point. I filed in notice of option on the property, so I was on title. I said, great, if you don't want me to sell it, then you just pay me how much you owe me now from the equity and I'll walk away. And then eventually it didn't happen, and then we sold it and we moved on. So I say that because that was a $100,000 piece of paper that I filed on that property. And I was in panic mode for a couple minutes too, because I wasn't sure if I filed it, but then I went and assured I did. So I remember I was like scrambling, I'm like, Kayla, we got to make sure we got this, because I just talked to this guy, and this isn't going to go well. And as soon as I saw it filed, I was like, we got this in the bag now. So it just depends on who's paying for what now. Is it him or is it the end buyer? So that's super important. I've seen it happen too many times where people don't file the notice of option with the initial paperwork, like getting it signed from your seller, getting it notarized, and then we go to somebody and we said, do you have the NOO signed? And they're like, nope. Well, is it filed? Nope. I'm like, you're naked on these lease purchase deals. The seller would have had a case, basically, if I didn't have that in place where he could have taken back the property.
A couple comments. So our agreement would attempt to protect him, but it would have been a lawsuit. You guys would have been battling, and nobody would have went anywhere for several months. For the new people, we're not talking about an owner financing or a sub-2 here, because when you own that, you own that. We're talking about only a sandwich, just to, again, for definitions. So when you type a home on lease purchase, if you made it contingent upon you finding your buyer, so therefore you don't have any risk because you will not start until you have your buyer. Once you procure your buyer, back to Rick's comment this morning, you will have your attorney, preferably, or you, record a notice of option. It just clouds title. So they can't get amnesia and sell it to Uncle Joey and forget about you. They cannot convey the property. You have the notice of option clouds title. That's all it is.
There's another piece of that too. I'm not a CPA, but because we were on the property, lived in the property, and had that NOO on title, our CPA was able to utilize that as our own personal residence, as if we actually bought it on traditional financing. So I didn't pay any capital gains on that either.
Yep. Side note.
Because it was my own residence, so it's not the case if it's an investment property.
But many people here can and will do that, and we'll hear about Steve's later, and Paul's going to be here for Associate Dev Day. You guys should be speaking to Paul, because this stuff is all from Paul.
So that was like $30,000 in addition. So
easy.
Because of that.
Yep, easy. The next one I wrote down is real general, but I did it because we have some trainings coming up, but I also think I want to hear you two talk about this, especially Brian. I'll read word for word I wrote, sucking at scripts is a way to lose, because you get, well,
it's
some
like
people are better.
One thing.
No, some people are not better. You got to learn them. And I'm putting this into the money category because if you're not prepared and you don't practice, and I'd like your guys' opinion on this, but I'm strong on this, and that you're going to get on the phone and your opportunity cost is you just throwing money away, in my opinion. Would you guys agree?
100%.
We didn't rehearse this.
You're
You
asking
can
the
tell by my
script master himself if he agreed.
Well,
know,
how fast? You used to call me and say, I'm going for a run, I'm listening to the scripts. Like, you just kept doing it.
Yep. I mean, being blunt, you're in this community and investing in coaching. If you're not trying to master the scripts, you're wasting your time. Period. End of story. You're wasting your time. And you're wasting the seller's time, too. You can't help them if you know what the hell you're talking about. So as I mentioned earlier, I was in sales for 25 years. I had no problem talking to people, but I was petrified to call sellers. And it was simply because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I was doing. So the way to crush that fear is to know what you're doing. So I downloaded all the seller calls to my phone. So walking through the airport or on the plane, I would listen to them over and over and over again to the point where I could recite what was going to be said next. And that got me, in a confident position when I was on the phone, that I at least had a good understanding to help these folks or take it to the next step. And then I just kept at it. So I would rehearse my scripts before I started calling. I would listen to my own calls. That was super helpful, actually, listening to my own calls and critiquing my own. And then now I'm at the point where I critique my own team's calls. So I've trained them. This is really the key here, is to get super good on the phone. Eventually, when you start to grow and scale your business, you're going to have VAs, you're going to have people that are doing the dialing for you. Now you can put them in the best position because you're the expert. So that's
Someone asked that over here earlier. That's good. That was a great question. There's your answer.
So that's all I did for the first 90 days. My goal was to be that much better from day 0 to day 90 on the phone, because I knew that's what was going to move the needle, and that's why I did a bunch of deals and was able to leave my job in 9 months, because I focused on the phone for those first 90 days.
I'll make one comment, then I think we should open up for some Q&A.
I was just going to say we did exactly what we said we wouldn't do, and that is we said we'd stop for questions. So we'll do that next.
Yeah, the opportunity cost. If you're not focused on mastering your skills, is you're always gonna lose deals. I mean, it's just the business. The business is about helping people solve challenges, and you can't help somebody solve challenge if you don't know how to help them or how to communicate properly to helping them. So focusing on it's the most foundational. What Dave Nares talked about today, like foundational with joy. I know the biggest gap that most people face, including myself, was the fear of the phone or hating to be on the phone. Anybody, raise your hand if you hate being on the phone.
I don't know who would love it until you know what to do.
Okay. Or you keep your hand raised if you're afraid of the phone, meaning to talk to people. Now, all of you are lying.
All of you.
All of you. I don't care how good you are. That's your biggest opportunity. It's the communication of solving the challenge. Once you can communicate it properly, and a lot of us lose deals, including myself, because I just didn't know. I knew I could help them, but I just didn't know how. And I couldn't simplify it enough for them to understand how I could help them. And that's really what mastering your scripts does, is because it pulls you away from you trying to explain everything to you asking the right questions. 90% of the time, asking questions.
Quick story before Q&A, because all the new hands in the room, there's so many stories that you have to stick around for like another 5 years to get all my war stories. But Zach, remember we talked about me critiquing your calls?
Oh my God.
Okay, so one of the things Kim and I had to do after the 08 mess was move from a 2.5 acre property here in Newport looking over the water, which is impossible to find, to a 1-bedroom, 600 square foot apartment. That was our move. Talk about a slap in the ego. In that apartment, I remember doing call critiques over and over and over and over and over again. So I don't want you to think for 1 second when we talk about the phone that I literally don't remember one student since we started the company that I listened to the first call and went, oh, this is amazingly effective. They are good. Nobody. So Kim and I were having breakfast one morning at our butcher block, which is like what could fit in that apartment, 2 by 2. And then I was listening to a bunch of calls, but one was Zach's, and I'm like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? It was awful.
See?
And now he's, it's ridiculous now. And everyone in the team is like that now, and everybody in the community who is doing these deals is like that now, but they all started the same way.
If we're being honest, the worst thing about being a coach is listening to call critiques.
Yeah.
But
Hardest thing.
But the biggest, but if it's the number one thing we could focus on, it's the biggest thing that changes somebody's business. Is simply just the scripts, how you communicate, and structuring those deals. All right, let's take some questions. We got a runner, eh?
Kristen, you did not come here thinking you were going to work out, did you?
Brian, real quick. So you said with the other deal that they called the loan due. Is that correct? That you were saying?
No. The bank was reneging on their claim that they were going to move the forbearance amount to the back of the loan. They wanted to collect it up front.
And did they have that authority? Was that not in the contract? Because it's a bank, or was this?
Yeah, again, that was the mistake, is I did not get it in writing.
You got a verbal.
I got a verbal, correct.
Oh.
Which means about this much, so.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Brian.
And whenever there's anything in your calls or deals in the community, if you're not 100% certain, you stop and call us. I mean, that's what you do. We have a mic out already, right?
Right. Thank you. Quick question, because it seems like a big theme of the day is that this journey creates change. And I believe any journey and the bumps and the lumps and everything creates change. I was just wondering because, and especially because your story, I got to hear it on one of the calls, I think a week or so ago. You were on the call and talking, and I just really loved it. I love the emotion. I think it's great. Just wondering if any of you guys would love to talk or would enjoy talking about the change that's happened to you since before you started this, from then to now. What's changed in you and about you?
I'll take 31 years and do it in 2 minutes. Okay. So because of the crash, mine's different. We're all going to be different here. But because of the crash, I alluded to this morning of being in my own way, if you guys remember. So the mental game, like we can all show you how to do deals. The coaches can show you how to do deals. What's changed in me is the realization that it's not about that to get people to success. One of the ways to answer this, and that is it's the mental game because I experienced it. So for 4 years, I blame me until enough people said, hello, Chris, the market went down. Like, it's not you. So, and then it took more years to get out of my own way until I said this morning, I know I said it quickly, but I said this morning until I reached out to someone who I knew already did that worse than I went through and then came out of it. That's all we have to all do. Someone out there or in the community has your story. You just got to connect with them and then get after it and execute. So what changed for me is the realization that it's more of a mental game than I realized and more of a mental game than you guys, I promise you, realize. The skill set piece for us is easy. Here, example. Why is it that we have the same course for everyone? We teach the same thing. We have the same calls. Brian has the same opportunity as Russ, as you, anyone. But someone does a deal in 30 days and someone does it in a year. Same stuff. It's the mental piece. And that's not to say that's a bad thing. I had baggage. Everybody has baggage. It's just a matter of how much and how quick we can get rid of it and mold it. And does this make sense? Okay, so that's my short answer.
It's a great question. I love it. I think the biggest shift for me was letting go of my ego and worrying about money as priority number one. I don't care about it anymore. So the shift for me is I focus on being a better husband, a better father, a better son, and a better friend. Like, that's what matters to me. I don't mean to sound corny, but that's the truth. Like, the money will take care of itself.
Well, I'm glad I had a couple of seconds here to think, felt the process. I grew up with a single mom. Dad wasn't around. No, my mom worked day to day. I don't know if anybody's ever been in a family where there's not enough money at the end of the week. Well, that was my household. So every single thing that was presented in my life was always a struggle. Everything's a struggle, and there's never enough. And then as I got older, I went through drug habits, drug abuse, rehab, things of that sort. So the biggest change for me has been my development, my personal development. I was taught that if I wanted to reach these giant goals, then the only way I got there is if I developed myself, and that would be inevitable. So I would like to say I'm really good at letting go now at this point in time, but I'm not. But that's the biggest change has been perspective, that if you surround yourself with the right people, you focus on the right things, and the results will happen, versus, the rich people on the rich side of town, got everything and it was easy for them because I went through a struggle. So it's just a change of perspective of, no, the people that are successful are the ones that put in the work. And that, then got the results. So I would say that's been the biggest change just overall.
Zach, you went third, and and this is a good way to transition, because Dave Nurse said this morning that, however he worded it, you guys heard him, but he said the relationships are everything. And he is by far, I was with Kim and a couple of people, and I said, he is the most amazing connector. And then he went and said that. He gives back the same way he's talking. He goes out and meets people, but every relationship we've had is because we've surrounded ourselves, like pointedly. And you're doing it now.
Thank you.
Great. Hi.
Okay, okay. got it. Okay, Brian, my question is to you. I think you've already answered part of it by the way you responded here, but in your early stages, what was the mind block? When you became aware that mindset is a big part of what we do, what items did you really have to overcome? You said ego. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that? Because many of us are still stuck on some of those mind blocks. I know one for me was Dr. Amanda.
A little closer, buddy. Just,
I know that for me, Dr. Amanda was tremendous in helping me with some of the situations that I had going on coming into the program. And so I think that has really shifted my focus and my perspective. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, great question, Jose. So certainly ego was big for me for a long time, mostly unknowingly, right? I think it's just, it's definitely a man thing. Like I just thought I was too macho to ask for help. And as I alluded to earlier, old habits die hard, right? So even into like the first deal, I remember the first sold I had was right in the middle of COVID, April 2020. We did the whole deal in a parking lot because everything was closed, right? I got a $6,000 check. I have sold hundreds of millions of dollars of elevators to people over my career, and that was like the most exciting check that I got, $6,000.
didn't you say you screamed? You said that.
That
too?
was my first taken. I screamed.
Oh.
Yeah, literally to the point where my wife.
Can you do the screen for us?
I'll hold the mic way back here. To the point where, and that's the taken thing was a great story because my wife came in and she says, well, "What's going on?" I said, a seller just signed his house over to me. And again, I had never gotten that excited about anything in my W-2 career. But that moment, sorry, Jose, when I got the check, and again, I talk about my family. My wife said, "I'm so proud of you," right? Because I was able to do this thing, and she had trusted me, she had believed in me, and to have like that, for lack of a better phrase, proof of concept. That's where it started the light bulb went off for me, and as this man has said many times, it's like, don't stop, double down. So it's like, I got my next one right after. I got another taken a couple weeks after that. And then all of a sudden, I had 5 or 6 houses on the market, right?
And you emptied your savings to do it.
Sarcasm, anyone? Yeah,
$60.
right, $20, yeah. You're welcome.
I think we got enough for maybe 2 more questions, 3 more questions.
Dan's pointing that way.
Here he is, the man, the myth, the legend. If you guys don't know who Steve Carney is, you gotta know.
He's being far too kind. So first off, Dan has been trying to get your attention less than 15 minutes to keep you on track.
Just so you guys know, when we look out, we see nothing because of the light.
Okay, just saying that he's trying to get your attention on that. So Brian, I know you didn't get a Q&A like the other guys did because you left your W-2 and you're the CEO of the leave your W-2. A question that many may be wondering, I know Chris talks about tyranny of how. What did you do about health insurance?
That comes up a lot, actually.
Wow.
And
Okay.
he dropped the mic too after that. Hey, what are you doing about health insurance? Boom. Nailed it.
Without
Steve.
going into grave detail, again, I'm just going to say to everyone, don't sweat that nonsense. Like, don't sweat the benefits, don't sweat the 401k. I pay less in health insurance now than when I was a W-2 employee. Less. So all you have to do is just get educated and get around the right people. Again, I had all these fears, like, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with this? Like, okay, Chris tells me, go to this guy, go to Paul Dion for your taxes, talk to these people for your entity. Like, we have all the answers. The answers are here. You just got to go. You just have to ask. You have to ask. That's it.
You talked to Dion early on, and you called me. I don't remember exactly what you said, but you said something like, he just saved me X. That was a lot of money, or strategy or something he did.
It was, again, tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah, that's stuff I didn't even know about. Yeah.
The dream team's here, you guys. You just got to ask.
Put it through your LLC. May do deals.
Other questions? We're okay still with time. Got about 6 minutes, I think. Or until Dan yells at me, the earlier of the two.
It's questions for Chris. From the first time I heard you speak, you mentioned that you gave up your license. You were a realtor.
Mhm.
That's a personal, kind of like a personal question. Why did you decide to give up the license and not renew and
Yep.
keep it active?
A couple reasons. One, after the crash, I wasn't really utilizing it pointedly. But more importantly, as we started scaling this, I felt like there was going to be, and I'll explain this, less drama in our marketplace without a license than with, because there's pros and cons of both. And what I mean by drama is if they got a postcard or a mailer or a phone call, a seller did, and we'd get a call from the realtor, like we're trying to steal the listing. And it was the farthest thing from what we wanted to do, and I just didn't want the drama. Coming out of the crash, we said, Kim and I, what are the kind of the rules of what we're going to do here? We're not going to sign on bank loans. We're not going to use cash. Like, we established the rules. Well, I'm not going to deal with drama. Like, life's too short. So when they call and squawk and scream like we were going to try to compete, I just get rid of the license, and guess what? Instantly happened. Now they're referring us business, and we're referring them business, and it's healthy. That's just my decision. If you're a realtor, anyone, I will show you how to capitalize on it if you want to keep it. The other reason for me was time's important. Someone said earlier how valuable time is. The CEU, and I'm sorry if someone in here is an educator of CEUs, but it's a complete waste of time. It has nothing to do with doing real estate, almost, with few exceptions. So I didn't want to waste 20 whatever hours a year doing that. So it's just a decision process that I put in priority.
It's a waste of time unless, for some reason, the Realtor Association wants to then put QLS as a CEU, then it would not be a waste of time.
We're working on it.
It'd actually be the best 20 hours possible.
Yep. So is that helpful? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And if you are a realtor, there's a way to capitalize it and kick butt, but that's your choice, and I'll show you how to do it.
Maybe one, two more questions.
Yeah.
Stefan and then Brian.
And then that'll do it, right, Dan? I think. Okay.
Mine is a quick question. The office building that you got, were you actively looking for an office building to do creative financing on, or did it just happen to come about as you were doing the normal course of business?
Yeah, great question. I don't think we said that in the deal structure. So we were at an office, me, at the time, Zach, Kayla, Nick, and one assistant, I think, and we grew out of it. And so we were looking to either worst case lease, because we had to move on for the end of the year, or yes, ideally, like when Zach looked for his personal home, we wanted to get something on terms. This, for those of you not familiar with the area, we're in a it's right down the street here. This is a pretty active market almost always. And so most people would probably say, oh, you're not going to find a owner financing deal, let alone a FSBO. He's on what they call $1 Million Mile, he the seller, right down the street here. And he wanted, not only was he selling for sale by owner, he wanted owner financing. Like one of the questions in the stack was, how do you convince sellers or whatever, how do you sell? You don't, you solve problems. This gentleman was older, since passed away. Probably, my guess is he knew something was up. So what he was trying to solve for is, instead of leaving his wife and his son with a property, he probably wanted a cash flow stream. So he wanted owner financing and forgot to put a prepay and forbid us to even try to pay it off. He wanted a long-term deal. So yes, we seeked it out, but we had to move either way if we didn't find it quick enough. That was a long answer, but yes.
No, appreciate it.
Yep, I love it. All right, last one.
Yeah, so I was kind of sitting here thinking for a little bit. I'm kind of wondering, you guys' businesses, Brian and Zach, is in a different place than Brian's. So I'd be curious to know from all three of you, what steps or stages have you guys have gone through to get to where you're at? So for example, Brian, you mentioned scripts, right? You had to know your scripts. So what was the next thing that you guys had to do, and as your company's matured?
Brian would probably be the best one to walk through that, I would think.
Yeah, so after scripts, and look, I still work on scripts to this day. I'm constantly tweaking my scripts, constantly paying attention to it. And I'll go against Zach here. I love critiquing calls. So that means that the students who are sending calls in, they're committed to getting better, and I want to help them get better. So I actually like it. But
It's an illness.
To answer your question, Brian,
He's not feeling okay. He's feeling a bit warm.
yeah, the next step, wow, it's freezing in here. The next step was, for me, was learning how to run a business, build a business, and scale it. Okay, so that was really the challenge, and all doing that while all this stuff was happening, like all these deals were happening, which I was doing. It was just me, and I had a VA that was calling my FSBOs. And that was when the light bulb went off, where it's like, okay, I should have had my assistant in place before that, which you painstakingly told me multiple times, just like my credit lines that I didn't have in place. So that was like the next hurdle for me. And unfortunately, because I had all this early success, I didn't have the systems in place. So once I got back to the business, like I had to catch up. So it took several months because I was focusing on the buyer side because that's where the money is. But the taken side started to really falter. So now I have all those systems in place, but in hindsight, I would have done it much sooner. I would have listened to my coach. I don't listen to everything he says, but for the most part,
It's pretty damn close.
it's pretty close.